All right, good to see all of y'all here. I do want to get to know everybody here if it's possible, if we get a break, or at the end, I'd like to just come up, meet me. I've put my contact information on the screen. I don't mind you. That is my cell phone and my email if you are interested at now or anytime later to reach out to me. And would you just do this? If you text me, I'm glad about that. I'd like that. Would you at least just tell me who you are? I do these events every once in a while, and somebody says, hey, can you tell me that thing you were talking about the other day? And I don't know who that is. I don't know what the thing was. I don't know what other day it was. So if you just let me know. I am the director of church starting for Texas Baptist. That's one of the two hats that I wear at the Texas Baptist. The other hat that I wear is I'm the associate director of missions. So actually on Wednesday, is that tomorrow? Tomorrow I'll be going to Brazil. We have a partnership with the Brazilian Baptist, and I'll be down there tomorrow night. And so I kind of wear both hats. One thing that Daryl said that I want to land both feet on, and that is we need to start more churches. But I hear a lot of people that say, well, we got enough churches as it is now. Why don't we just focus on strengthening those churches? Well, I don't disagree with that. I think we should be strengthening those churches. I'm going to get way ahead of myself, though, and give you a couple of stats that I think will blow your mind, or at least y'all know, everybody knows, we're not unaware that Texas is growing, and growing rapidly all over the state. You know that just by driving around. But I want to try to give you some pegs to hang your ministry hats on, and we're going to talk about some other things as you go along the way. But Texas is going to double in the next 25 years, just roughly. It's real rough. Some people are estimating now it might be faster than that if Texas is going to double. But according to NAM and other groups, the Southern Baptist Convention is shrinking by about 800 to 1,000 churches a year. That's how many are closing their doors across the country. And we're getting our fair share here in Texas, I'm sure in your areas also. If the trends continue of the percentage of churches that close, in the next 25 years, there will be, counting the BGCT and SBTC combined, there's about 7,000 churches. And we'll be sitting on somewhere around 3,500 to 4,000 churches. Not quite half. I want to say those two stats back to back. Population will double and our churches will halve. And so there's a great need to strengthen our current churches. Now, that stat's not anywhere in the slides that we're going to go through. But it's sobering. I hope that's not true. I hope those numbers don't stay that way. I hope we can kind of catch churches before they collapse and get them turned around. A lot of people are putting a lot of effort into that, so I hope we can keep that from happening. But that's kind of the way the trends are looking now. So we do need to start new ones. We do need to help the unhealthy churches. And honestly, that's every church. But I'm going to start with something fun for just a moment. You've already got the slide there for you. This is Malachi Nathan Ma. Who in the world is that cat? That's my grandson. If you're a grandparent, give me just 5 seconds to be excited about being a granddad. My daughter went into labor on Thanksgiving Day. Thank you. Her married name is Ma. She wasn't sure she was going to take it. She said, Dad, it's just such a short name. It's Ma. It's just 3 letters. I said, well, your name is Hal now. What are you doing? You're not Higginbotham going to Ma. You're Hal going to Ma. And she just said, I went straight Hebrew. Malachi Nathan is his name. Now, I am showing him off because I'm a new granddad. That's the day he was born. My wife and I are trying really hard, not to be those parents that say, well, that's not the way we did it. They didn't even go to the hospital. They just had the baby at a birthing center, and the baby was born at 4:30, and they were home at 8 in the morning, 3.5 hours after the baby was born. That just blew my wife and my mind, but we were right there after he got home. He's 4 hours old, already back in their apartment at that point. Weird to me, but that's what they did, so that's where we are. Now, yes, I'm showing off Malachi. He's already grown. He's 7 weeks old now, whatever. That was on Friday after Thanksgiving, so whatever that is now, 7 or 8. Holding him yesterday before I came down. But I do want to show this, other than just talking about being a new granddad. The Texas I want to focus on, in part, we're going to look at the next 7 years to 2030. But as we look beyond that, the Texas of 2050, this cat's going to be graduated from college and going into the workforce. I'm talking about his Texas. If you have a toddler, or you have a grandchild, or you have a child in your life, I'm talking about the Texas they're going to be entering into as an adult. So it does kind of connect. One of the things I do want to say with this slide, as I talk about it, and he only gave me an hour and 40 minutes to talk, and y'all might think only, I'm a talker and I can preach for an hour and 40 at church if they don't shut me down. I'm the interim pastor right now at First Baptist Church in Seagoville, Texas. You might know where Seagoville is, southeast of Dallas. If you know it, you've probably been to the jail. I'm not going to say much more. Some of the stats that we're going to talk about today, you could probably find different stats that aren't exactly the same. For lots of reasons. They're evolving quickly and nobody can quite get a handle on it. Somewhere in there I'm going to say that Dallas-Fort Worth is going to grow by 2 million people by the year 2030. And I had somebody from Hearst City Council tell me I was wrong, that DFW alone is going to grow by 8 more million people by 2030. I don't think that can possibly be right. He says my stats are very low. But I've had other people tell me that it's not. I pull the most current stats that I can. If you're looking online or you have a research tool, just look at the dates. Anything prior to COVID is probably not going to be super accurate. But these are just trends. And we're just looking at things, trying to make sense of it. If you're pulling stuff from 2010 or 2014, those projections are probably way off. Try to find, if you're looking for information on your own, anything post-COVID. The 2022 data is not really out yet. You can find 2020 and 2021 in different places. But as we examine all this stuff, I have this slide here for a purpose. As you see what's going on in Texas or in your region of Texas, for most of y'all, Austin, San Antonio area, and beyond in the general area, greater area down here, as we see all this stuff, we need to ask the question, and this is true for you as a pastor, by the way, it's free for that. If it's snowing outside, what does that mean? Now, I know it's not snowing, at least not here today, where you could be up in the mountains in California. It could be one of 4 things if it's snowing. Is it just a snow shower? We get those in Texas every once in a while. Is it a blizzard? Well, I don't know if we've had too many blizzards in this part of Texas. I know they do up the Panhandle. Is it winter? Is it going to be snow on the ground for months, weeks and months on end? I'm so glad I live in Texas. There's a reason I live in Texas. I'm from East Texas, went to Alabama for 10 years. If you try to figure out my accent, I took East Texas, put some Alabama on it. And I left Alabama because, came back to Texas because I thought Alabama was too cold of a state to live in. If I think Alabama's too cold, I would never make it up to Minnesota or Wisconsin or Michigan. I was born in Michigan, my mom's family's up there. Is it winter or are we in an ice age? And so as we examine all this data, you need to understand that in your context, and we need to understand that in Texas. So is it just a snowstorm? In other words, is this something that's just kind of blowing through and it's going to be different? It's just an anomaly that something just happened, it's something weird. COVID might be that, or it might be a blizzard. It has changed who we are and what we do, but 30 years from now, it may not change. It'll look different, it has big of an impact. But if we're in an ice age, that's going to last the rest of our lives. And so as we examine this stuff, we need to figure out which of these they are. We'll talk about some population growth. I actually had all the places where I got this from on another slide. When I brought it over to this one, I didn't bring over the context. I'll certainly be glad to get that for you. But Texas this is data as of about October. So it could be slightly skewed. Texas will grow by an additional 5.2 million people by the year 2030. Another 5 million. Well, that's just 7 years away. Not even 7 years away now. So that's almost 1 million a year is what we're looking at this point. And so that's what Texas is going to go. And by the way, Arkansas doesn't have 5 million people. Oklahoma doesn't have 5 million people. Louisiana doesn't have 5 million people. Actually, Arkansas and Louisiana combined have right about 5 million. This is the state of West Virginia that is moving to Texas, the whole state at one fell swoop in the next 7 years is what it feels like. Houston will grow to about maybe 9 million. DFW will grow to maybe up to as much as 10 million. In Austin, San Antonio, you're looking at growing maybe up to as big as 6 million. Trajectory being even faster than that after 2030. Most of that's driving that is, y'all know the tech industries that's up in Austin and manufacturing, and certainly you have the military here and all sorts of things. The estimated growth by the year 2050 is an additional 20 to 30 million people. That's not the final number, that's what's coming. Texas is at 30 million now, so it's very likely we're going to double by the time that Malachi graduates from college. That's where we are. A whole nother Texas that isn't even here yet. It's coming. It's going to move here. It's going to be born here. And it's coming from everywhere. It's coming from Latin America. It's coming from California. It's coming from Southeast Asia. You know these things to be true. So And these are conservative estimates. I've talked to some folks on what's called the Texas Triangle. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's a business, education, and government consortium that talks about the region of Texas that stretches from DFW to San Antonio to Houston and back up to DFW, makes a triangle. And the growth in that area, and all of them are telling me these numbers are the minimum numbers that they're expecting, that we could grow even faster than this, but nobody's saying we're going to grow slower than this. Estimate is that Texas will probably double from today, we're at 30 million, to get to 60 million somewhere around 2047, if everything holds up. And then you just think about that locally, where you are. And we're doubling in weird ways. We certainly are watching our cities and metropolitan areas grow out, but by show of hands, how many of you have areas where you live where somebody had 2 acres, a 2-acre lot, some builder came in and bought it, and now they have 24 homes on those 2 acres. Anybody got that going on in your area? So we're growing inside of the areas as well. There was 2.2 acres that a guy was lost, and I could have bought it for just the taxes on it. Could have bought it for $135,000 in 2009. I just didn't have the money to do it. My wife was not interested in it at all. A developer bought that 2.2 acres, and he built 37 homes on it where I live. 37. I counted the lots. I'm from East Texas, rural East Texas. I don't want to be in my house and you in your house and we be able to shake hands. I don't want to do that. But you know that's what's going on, right? I want to talk about some of the roads that are coming that you may be aware of. Some of these and not others. I did not. I had it on the slide here, the Aggie Line Expressway that they're building, but I took it out. But the big ones that are coming is Loop 9. I don't know if you've heard about this or not. It's already in development. It's very early in the stages, but they're hoping they'll be completed by 2030. And this is the new loop they're building around DFW. And these are the different sections they're going to build it. Right now, the only part that they don't have planned to start is the section from Denton back down to Weatherford. That's the dotted in the northwest section. The rest of it, they've started to work on all of those other parts. And that goes through Kaufman County. And by the way, none of the loop goes through Dallas County. It's a loop around Dallas, and none of it is in Dallas County. Only the extreme far western section goes through Tarrant County. For the most part, the loop misses both Dallas County and Tarrant County. It goes through Cleburne, it goes through Burleson, goes through McKinney, if you know Dallas-Fort Worth very much. And the estimate is that just on the loop alone, not counting the rest of DFW, that it's going to bring 2 million homes. 2 million people. A population of 2 million will just live on the loop. That's what's adding. That's what the guy from Hearst City Council told me. And I just said, well, that doesn't make sense because I got 2 million coming to DFW all together. He says, your numbers are wrong. I said, your numbers are wrong. But anyway, we'll see. It's just saying we know Dallas is going to grow. You know, most of y'all know about Loop 99 that's going around Houston. That's far more completed than Loop 9. This is the what's called the outer loop or the third loop that's going, and it's bigger than the Loop 9 around DFW slightly. You can see that. I won't spend a lot of time on it. But that's just the growth of Maryland, of Houston. A couple years ago, I was leaving downtown Houston. I called my wife. I was driving back. I said, hey, I just left downtown Houston. I'm in the northwest part of downtown, and I'm headed home. And she said, okay. She called me about an hour later. And she said, where are you now? I said, I'm in northwest Houston. She said, oh, is traffic really bad? I said, I've been driving 80 miles an hour the whole time. I drove 80 miles, I'm not kidding, well, I should confess that maybe, but I was driving 80 miles an hour for an hour, and I was in northwest Houston the whole time. The geographical footprint of Houston is the largest in our area, and just to put it, it's almost the size of Maryland. If you really look at what's called now Greater Houston, it's almost the size of Maryland. That's how big Houston is. DFW is almost the size of northern New Jersey, the north half of New Jersey. And just to put it in perspective, if you were to drive from Royce City to Weatherford, which those are sort of the extremes of the Metroplex. If you know DFW, Royce City is on the east side, Weatherford's on the west side. That is closer, that's further apart, that's 93 miles, than New York is to Philadelphia. New York to Philadelphia is 91 miles. So DFW, now, if you could stretch it, and this loop is beyond that, it's like putting a loop around New York City all the way around Philadelphia. That's what that's looking like, and the Houston one's just as big. Y'all know this, I'm just giving you some information. Go bedazzle your churches Sunday. We have 3 new interstates being built in Texas. Big chunks of that will be done by 2030, but it's the interstates, and y'all know how fast those get built in Texas and in the United States. That won't all be done. The first one is I-14. You might know about this, Tom. I'm sure you know all about I-14. I-14 is the newest interstate announced that's going to cut across the whole country. It's going to go from the coast in Georgia. It's either Savannah. I'm pretty sure it's Savannah or is it Augusta. I can't remember the terminal point there. It's going to cut through Montgomery, Alabama, if you know that region very well, through Alexandria, Louisiana, come through, enter into Deep East Texas, cut across East Texas. You see the route there. Come through Temple, Killeen, keep going west until it meets up with the interstates out west, kind of in the Midland, Odessa area. It'll go through San Angelo. I-14 will then become it'll be as significant of an east-west route as 10 and 20 and 30 are. And we'll have another east-west route. It's also going to connect. That's going to be significant here because it's going to connect the hub of what is Central Texas, another route east and west besides just north and south. And so it's not an accident that Drake McLean put his trucking company in Temple, Texas, and now they got this road coming through. It's just a spur for the rest of it. So if you love living in rural East Texas and Lufkin and in Huntsville, you might consider moving north or south if you want to stay rural, because it's going to continue growing. And they're hoping that'll be the Texas part will be built fairly quickly. Mississippi, not so quick. Texas, we'll get it done pretty soon. You may or may not know of an interstate that they're developing now out west, Interstate 27. It's going to be all the way from Denver, Colorado to Laredo. The only section they have of it so far, by the way, they do have one small section of I-14 completed. Where is that, Tom?
It's from Killeen over to Temple.
It's from Killeen to Temple. Runs right. It basically links Killeen to Interstate 35.
That route is called Port to Port, and they're connecting forts in Louisiana, Texas, all the way to Savannah, but also there'll be a spur down to Houston.
Yep. And so we got. If you know 27 right now, the only part of 27 connects Amarillo to Lubbock, if you know West Texas very well. But now there's going to be a north-south way out in West Texas. They got plenty of land out there. They could build whatever they want to. Anybody here from West Texas? Have you seen, there's some land available, aren't there? They could build some land. But it's going to be, and obviously you can see why, coming from Laredo. Laredo is the largest inland port, that place of entry, anywhere in the United States. There's more shipment that goes through by inland, not the other ports, goes through Laredo than any other city, and this is just going to take it to Denver, and the plans are to take it all the way to Canada. And but this part of it will be Laredo to Denver, and so it'll go way out there in West Texas if you know it very well. And then most of y'all probably are familiar with Interstate 69. That's going to go through East Texas. Big chunks of it is already completed, especially down in South Texas. But it's going to go from Texarkana to Houston to Victoria. It's going to cut through right in through the 14. They're going to intersect there. And then in Victoria, it's going to break into 3 parts, going to Brownsville, McAllen, and also to Laredo. It'll also connect to Laredo. Laredo will get both of these. They're the only one that's going to get 69 and 27. So, okay, what difference? I didn't know I was coming here to talk about roads. These are the modern day railroad systems. And everywhere we've seen interstates develop in the last 50 years, and they grow, those towns grow. And if we're going to grow, we're going to double or more. A lot of that growth is going to happen on these new roads. And this doesn't even count the roads that we live on now that they're going to be significantly expanding. How many of y'all like driving 85 miles an hour out there on 130 when you want to go up north and bypass Austin, right? Well, they're building another one. And it's going to be from Houston to Aggieland, right up to into Waller, right up going. It's going to be between A&M and Houston, and so it's going to be another 85. Will you be driving on that, Steve, when they get that sucker done? Not 85, all right. I drove through Virginia a couple years ago, and there's sign limits in Virginia all over the state. If you've ever seen them, you'll know what I'm talking about. 80 miles per hour is considered reckless driving. They have that sign everywhere. And I just thought, everybody in Texas must be driving recklessly. We drive 80 to go to get a donut, don't we? Really. I preached for a while when I wasn't quite the interim, I was kind of almost the interim of a church in Roscoe, Texas. You might know where Roscoe is. And I was talking to one of the guys, and he worked in Snyder. I said, I said, Snyder, how far is that? It's like an hour and a half, an hour and 40. He goes, well, the way I drive, I get there in about an hour. And I thought he was joking, but it's about an hour and 10 minutes to get there. I said, how fast do you go? He says, I go fast enough to get there in about an hour. But these roads, as they're being built up, as we see, all of the major roads here in San Antonio are going to be widened. There are going to be more loops put in. There's going to be more infrastructure built. And, I mean, where's San Antonio going to stop? Is it going to Seguin? Is it going further than that? Or how far is it going south, north? There's some talk. I talked to another gentleman that's part of the Texas Triangle that he refers to Austin, San Antonio as ASA, A-S-A. Just like we have DFW. Like, Austin and San Antonio are pretty far apart to be lumped them all together. He says, well, it won't be. And y'all know what's happening in New Braunfels and Green and that whole area up there as it continues to grow as well. I want to talk a little bit about business culture here in Texas. That's kind of letting this happen. I don't need us to be all about business, but this does impact our churches and associations as we think about these things. There are now more Fortune 500 companies in Texas than any other state. That was not true 3 years ago. In the last 3 years, enough Fortune 500 companies have moved to Texas that we now have. There are 54 in Texas. The next two are California and New York. And most of those companies, these are the companies that have all moved within the last 18 months. Caterpillar, Oracle, Hewlett-Packard, Tesla, Charles Schwab, Chevron, all just in the last about 16 months have moved their headquarters to Texas. I'm going to go way back and test some of y'all's memories. Some of you are children when this happened, but I would like to think I was a child. I was 16. How many of y'all remember 1982 in Texas? And we went about bankrupt, right? My dad was a bivocational preacher in the oil business, and then he wasn't anymore. And so our state government decided they wanted to see if they could just do something different to change Texas' economy. Our economy is built on basically two things, oil and cows. And we had a series of droughts, and all the cows died, and the oil prices just bottomed out at the time. And so when Bill Clements was the governor, they came up with this deal. If you were a national company and you moved your headquarters to Texas, no corporate taxes for 15 years. I don't want to get into debate politically if that's a good idea or not. I'm just telling you what happened, okay? Y'all can debate those things in the break. And so the first company to do that moved their headquarters, was Sears. Well, that wasn't necessarily the company you want to hang your hat on, but then Montgomery Ward did it. Well, they kind of went, then it was one after another, and that's why we have 54. That was in 1986. Sears was the one that did it. And I remember I was living in Alabama, and I was reading something called a newspaper. And in it, the USA Today newspaper, it said in there, I remember it was a 15-year tax-free thing. I had wondered what's going to happen when the 15 years are up. And in the paper, I'm reading, sitting in my house in Alabama, and it says, Sears has requested Texas to give them another 15-year tax break. And in Texas, the state said, no, we're not going to do that. And Sears said, we might relocate if you don't. And Texas said, okay. And it kind of became, that's part of what led to this, and this growth that's coming here. Whether we can think that's a good idea or a bad idea, that's part of the reason those companies. Comerica has moved here from Detroit, and we can go down the list. A quote from Greg Abbott, again, I'm not trying to get political, but just the quote that we have here is, every 6 days, this is from last year, every 6 days another company from somewhere else relocates its headquarters in Texas. Of the 54 that are Fortune 500, I'm just talking about the top 500 companies, 10%. Of the top 1,000 companies in America, 96 have their headquarters in Texas. But then there are many smaller companies that don't fit that top 500 or top 1,000. You know them. They're in your areas. I just ask you where you live, and you can come up with several in your area of major companies, whether they're in the top 500 or not, that have moved to Texas. 60, and here's the next stat. That's why it's going to drive people to come here. 68% of Texas executives believe their companies are understaffed. 68% of executives who are moving their companies here say their companies are understaffed. 2/3. And that was as of last October. So this is the class participation time. I do want an out loud answer. It's not rhetorical. What does that mean that 68% of our executives think we're understaffed with the companies that are already here? Say again, Tom? We need more people. And we need a certain type of people. Trained people, skilled people. Whether that's skilled to get the job, to do the manual labor, or it's skilled to do the technology side of things, or the admin side, the managerial side. So if these companies are coming, and they're coming rapidly, and as they come, they don't have enough people, that means there's going to be hiring for those in Texas, who are trained and ready, and or it's bringing more and more people here. We know all this stuff already. Here are the businesses that are growing in Texas. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide. Obviously, the construction business. I have a twin brother. Some of y'all know that. He looks a whole lot like this. And I was up with him in Seattle, and one of the guys at his city council was real excited. They were doing a housing development on the edge of town, and he took me out there, and I was going with my brother. My brother didn't say anything. He knows what I see. He knows what you see. And they were so proud. They were building this whole subdivision. They were going to build some new homes in the subdivision. Now, they control how many homes can be built per year because of the environment impact and some other stuff. And he was so excited. We're going to get the town of about 17,000, 18,000 people. He says, this year we're going to build 16 new homes. Wow. That's all, right? How many of y'all are watching subdivisions go up in your area and they're building 100 at a time or 40 at a time simultaneously? You can see them in the stages of development. They got the slab over here, they got the sticks over here. This one's got a roof. This one, or it's got at least the wood top. And this one's now got the comp top. This one's got closed in, and the one on the end's got brick on it already, right? You're watching it happen. They was excited they were going to get 16 new homes that year. I think I'm watching building 16 a week almost simultaneously. So construction, real estate, oil and gas, of course, is always going to be big in Texas, certainly in West Texas and certainly in the Houston area, but also the rest of the state. Manufacturing, supply chain, I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. Technology, healthcare, defense industry, banking, a lot of headquarters of finance and banking. There is talk, and it's not shut down yet, that the New York Stock Exchange may be moving, and it may be moving to Texas. And there's two options, North Austin or north of Fort Worth. And it would be the Texas Stock Exchange. It'll be the New York Stock Exchange because of the taxes that they pay so much. I don't think that has a lot of weight. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I don't know if you've been north of Fort Worth lately, up in the Alliance area. Charles Schwab, TD Ameritrade, the one that Fidelity, they all have huge campuses up there. I mean, they all employ 5,000 to 6,000 people, each of them, in the finance industry up there. And then, of course, you got Leisure Entertainment. How many of y'all been to Seattle? I said I had a brother in Seattle. I take vision trips up to Seattle. By the way, if your church wants to partner with a church plant in Portland or Seattle, we're going to be going in a couple of months, and we are going to be signing up in the next week or two, so see me about that. Or if you know Noe Trevino, he and I are putting those together. How many of y'all have been to Seattle, by show of hands? Anybody here? Have y'all ever seen the port out there where they're unloading? Isn't that pretty impressive? It's pretty amazing to see all that. It's just stunning to me. I was out there one time and I saw these box containers out there, and I counted 14 containers that I could see above deck. So I asked the person that was with me, I said, well, how many containers are below deck? He says, you're seeing about half the height. There's about as many below deck as there is above deck normally. They have to balance it out that way. So I'm saying, you're telling me there's about 14. He said, it might be 12 or 13. So you're telling me there's 24 to 30, something like that, levels of containers per ship that comes over? He goes, that's right. And I'm watching unload it. So that looks impressive. But I want to share with you why Texas is so much more impressive. If you're not from Texas, I'm sorry for being an arrogant Texan. This is the tonnage that comes into the United States per year. Houston brings in 285 million tons a year, the Port of Houston. Y'all find Seattle there on the list. Where is it? The very bottom. Seattle brings in about 23, on a good year, 30 million tons per year. On a good year, 30 million. It's usually around 25. Simple math, like just round off. How much more tonnage is coming through Houston than is coming through Seattle? Simple math is 10 times the number, right? It's not exact. And that's year after year after year. But I want y'all to look at something else. Then what's number 2? South Louisiana. That's not counting New Orleans. That's coming up. Number 3 is Corpus Christi. Number 4 is New Jersey, New York, New Jersey. Number 5, New Orleans. Number 6, Long Beach. Then Baton Rouge. Then Beaumont. Los Angeles, Port Arthur. Los Angeles rounds out the top, and then I skipped a few because I wanted to show where Port Arthur and Freeport and Texas City were. That they rank down in the teens. I left a few out in between. Because I wanted to show you that There are more goods and services coming through Freeport than there is Seattle. If you've seen that Seattle, how impressive that is. There's more coming through Texas City. The next slide, I color-coded it for you. I want you to see how many are coming through Texas. This is, and I didn't include the Louisiana ones. If you want to include Louisiana, you'll see more. Most shipping that comes to the United States of America comes through Texas and Louisiana. Another class participation time. Why do you think you would not go to LA, Portland, Seattle, if you're coming from Asia with goods? Instead, you would skip that and go all the way through the Panama Canal. When they get clogged up there, come all the way up around Mexico into the Gulf of Mexico to Texas or Louisiana. Why do you think that is? What? It's Texas. It's cheaper to run your products through Houston or to Beaumont, and plus you're also in the center of the country, and then your shipping is a little bit easier, but it's because of taxes. So when next time you're out in Seattle, if you can't see the Port of Houston. It's not like Seattle where you're just kind of in the city looking over it. That's why the Seattle one or the one in New York, New Jersey looks so impressive. You can see it from everywhere, but you can't down there. But just look at it. Now, technically, Los Angeles is the biggest. They're the biggest, and they're proud about that. We're the biggest ports. Okay, well, good for you, but then the people in Texas must be far outworking you, because in Houston they're pulling out, what is that, 4 times as much, almost 5 times as much work out of a smaller port than what you have for a lot of reasons. Here are the fastest growing counties. Raise your hand as I call the counties out. I want to see how many people we got here. This is by percentage. Fastest growing county in the last decade was Hayes. Got to have some Hayes people here, right? Nobody from Hayes? Como? Did I say that right? Wow, man. The guy, they always talk about all the places in Texas that you say incorrectly. I get them all wrong. I live in DFW, and you can tell me 7 times in a row, and I'll still say that town southeast of DFW wrong every time. Is it Waxahachie or Waxahachie? I don't know, but I know what it is. Williamson. How many of y'all know Williamson's just north of Austin? Anybody connected there? Kaufman, southeast of Dallas. Fort Bend, you know where Fort Bend is? Just west of Houston. Rockwall, just east of Dallas. Denton, north of Dallas. Montgomery, north of Houston. Collin, north of Dallas. Chambers. Anybody know where Chambers is? It's just east of Houston. It's east of the bay in Houston. That's by percentage. Here are the fastest growing by actual numbers of people that moved into their counties. Harris County grew by almost 2/3 of a million in the last decade. That's Houston. Tarrant grew by 300,000. That's my county. I live in Tarrant. If you ever want to come to DFW, that is the better half of the Metroplex. Every once in a while, my sister lives in Taylor, one of them, and she'll say, "Hey, we're coming up to Dallas." I said, "Why are you going to Dallas?" She goes, "We're coming to see you." I said, "I'm not in Dallas. If you want to come see me, you need to come over to Fort Worth." But better half of the Metroplex. Bexar County there and Tarrant, almost the same number, both almost 300,000. Collin County, Travis, Dallas, Denton, Fort Bend, Williamson, and Montgomery by numbers that have moved there. And then as those interstates are being built and as those infrastructures grow out, you're going to see those next counties continue to grow even beyond that area. Real quick, this is some pretty fresh stats. I'm not going to read this whole page. You guys are good at math. Some of you are. Anyway, I just want to point out, look at the race change in Texas just since 1970. By show of hands, how many of you were born in 1970 or earlier? That would be me. All right, that's most of us in the room. A couple of y'all didn't raise your hand, and I bet you are. But anyway, Texas identified as 87% white in 1970. I wasn't born in Texas. I was born in Michigan. And in 2020, 50%. So that's a pretty significant change. Look at some other ones. Where are the other demographics that kind of change to you as we look at them? By the way, Hispanics for some reason get mixed in how they get counted. I don't understand that. Look at the bottom two. Other race or 2 or more. What was the percentage of people who claimed to be biracial or multiracial in 1970 and 1990? It was negligible. What percentage of the population now claims to be biracial or multiracial? 1 in 6. And that number is going to keep going higher. I'm gonna throw this is as an aside. Numbers are great. You got to do something with them. Y'all aren't gonna. Your church folks aren't gonna care about any stuff. Here's where this becomes practical. As our communities get more and more diverse, that doesn't just mean that white people and black people and Hispanics and Asians are going to live close to each other. It means they're going to intermarry and love each other and live life together, which means it's going to be more and more challenging, almost near impossible, if we look in 25 years and that growth in Texas, that we think we're going to have a whole bunch of churches that are all white, all black, all Hispanic, or all Asian. Because the people aren't going to be all that. Our churches are going to have to be integrated. The monolithic churches will not last, not beyond a generation. Our children and grandchildren don't want it to. They want to go to church with people that they went to school with. And that's just the reality we live in. Now, that doesn't mean we change everything overnight. It doesn't mean we don't have our cultural differences. We do live in those differences. We have to be mindful of this, though. So, it's tough. 2021, there was a milestone that happened sometime mid-year that Texas now, as of 2021, the Hispanic population in Texas was at 40.2%. And the white population was 39.3%. And sometime in 2021, a year and a half ago, give or take, Hispanic became the largest population group in the state of Texas. Another historical milestone hit in the fall, probably sometime mid-October, is when we broke the 3 million mark. If you'll pull, what? 30 million, yes, thank you, Fred. 30 million. If you'll pull stuff, it'll show our population is at 27, 28, or 29 million. You just know that data is old. We hit 30 million. I'm going to just like to think, I know it's too late, but Malachi was born in the fall. I think he was the 30th million Texan. I don't know if that's true or not. All comes back to him, right? Estimate population based on the 5.2 million that's coming, this is probably low, but that we're going to look at 35 million people by 2030. Some people are saying it's going to be more than that. Some people are saying it's going to be a lot more than that. But that's a bare minimum. And the Texan population by 2050 may be as much as 60 million, possibly more. I'm going to skip that one. Come back then. I'm going to come back to that one in just a moment. Here's what we need to do with that data. If indeed we're going to have another 5.2 million people come to Texas, and here's another stat that's startling, and you're going to see that if you get the Texas Baptist Monthly, Craig Christina is quoting the stats that I gave to him, and I got this from Gallup. This just came out last fall. Actually, I got it from the TV station and Bryan College Station, who got it from Gallup, and then went back to the original source. That as of last fall, 47% of people in Texas identify as a member or connected to some religious entity whatsoever. 47%. That includes Baptist, Catholic, Assemblies of God. It includes Mormons, Hindus, Muslims, Jews. 47% of the people in Texas identify with a religious entity of some sort. For the first time ever, last year, we dropped below 50% of people had any affiliation spiritually whatsoever. And what that means is, if Texas is at 30 million, and if at least half of the people have no connection whatsoever to a church or a synagogue or any, that 15 million people in Texas are not affiliated with any spiritual connection whatsoever. And we're going to add another 5 million to that. So that means our unreached people group in Texas is at 20 million. Let me say that again. Our unreached people group in Texas by 2030 will be 20 million people. We can't be arguing over the one good teacher that we've got in our church that wants to go to the other church. We can't be arguing about, territories and who gets what churches. Right now, we need all hands on deck. What I mean by that to say is that means there are going to be more unreached people in Texas in 2030 this is even current stats, than live in the country of Austria. If you know your flags, you might can guess with me what these flags are. More unreached people in Texas right now than the entire population of Austria, than the entire population of Cambodia, Suriname, Bolivia, Sweden. That's not Suriname, that is in East Africa, I forget the other one. Sweden, Greece, Switzerland, Portugal, Israel. There are more unreached people in Texas than each of those countries, and 130 others. Texas is the 70th highest population unreached mission field in the world. There are only 70 countries with more lost people than Texas has. About 130 have less. Now, of course, we got to go do missions. I'm going to Brazil tomorrow. I'm all about missions. We need to reach people for Christ. And we have a lot of churches here, so there's work already here. I'm not diminishing that. I'm not saying don't do missions. I'm just saying sometimes we need to think about it. Here's some other stats. Right now we have about 5,200 Texas Baptist churches. SBTC has about 2,700. Half of those are dually affiliated, so combined we're at 6,000 to 7,000, maybe slightly over that. If every church in Texas grew by 200 people, every one of your churches grew by 200 people by 2030. In every church you can imagine, I mean the tiny ones, the big ones, if they all grew by 200 people, we would only reach 1 million people. That's it. And we have 20 million unreached people. I mean, we need the Assemblies of God and the Presbyterians and the Methodists help on this, right? Even the ones we don't like, something's got to give. That means we're only going to reach 5% if we all grew by 200. And our churches aren't growing by 200 right now in the next 7 years. If we added 500 new churches and they all only grew by 200, we would only reach 100,000 people. Now, I say that to say this. Do we need new churches? Some people say, no, we don't. We're good. We can just fix the health ones that are there now. I'm all for that. We got to do that too. Yes. But we have to also start new churches, and we have to grow healthy churches. We've got to figure out some game plan. We've got a lost generation around us. I'm going to talk about generation in just a moment. This is just highlighting how much we need a movement of God, a prayer-soaked, Holy Spirit-led movement of God amongst His churches. Amen. Like some of us have experienced, but it's been a long, long time. I'm going to chase a rabbit for a second on that, having said that. This is show of hands. Some of y'all have been hesitant, but I really need your help on this. How many of you in this room have been part of something that I'm about to describe? You've been a part of a 24-hour prayer vigil for something going on at your church, for revival prayer cottage meetings leading up to revivals, or for a significant season of prayer where you come to the church and that's all you do is you pray for long periods of time. Raise your hand high if that's you. All right? Raise your hand high if your church is, you've never been a part of that. Is anybody here? Usually when I ask congregations or groups of people that, the people that raise their hand that have done that are all about my age and older. Upper 40s and older. Most of y'all aren't that age, I know. But the people under 50, they don't know what I'm talking about. Prayer cottage meeting, what's that? 24-hour prayer vigil, I've never done that, never heard of that. But test me, go to church and ask this week. We've got to be prayer-led again. I'm going to start preaching the rabbit. This is two quotes, one from a new guy and one from an old guy. Most of y'all know who Mark Clifton is. The community does not exist for your church exists for the community. I went to Marlin, Texas, and y'all know where Marlin. I met with a church that was about to close their doors. They eventually did. I asked them the question. They were down to 12. And I asked the question, why do you think the people in your church the people in your community, why are they not coming to your church? Nobody had an answer. And finally, one guy said, they just like beer. Well, that didn't seem like quite the answer that connected to my question, one way or another. But what he meant to say is, the people that aren't coming to our church wouldn't fit in here, and they don't like what we do, and we don't like what they do. He just kind of wrapped it all up with that statement. I'm not saying y'all start beer services at your church. Don't hear me saying that. I'll get fired. I need to say this is, if you expect the lost and dying community of people who aren't even Texan, they don't even have a Texas culture because they're coming from India, and they're coming from California, and from wherever else in the world, in New York, they're not going to come to your church and expect and thrive and love how your church does things the way it did 43 years ago, because it's not their culture. So if you know Mark Clifton, he says in a much more cheerleader way, the community does not exist for your church. Your church exists for the community. C.S. Lewis said it another way a long, long time ago. The church exists for nothing else but to draw men to Christ, to make them little Christ. If you don't, nobody knows who Mark Clifton is outside of church leadership world. Everybody knows who C.S. Lewis is. The church doesn't exist for that ladies' club that meets on Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. I'm not telling you to cancel that because y'all keep your jobs. that exists for the world out there, the world that I'm describing. I want to talk a little bit about, and then I'm going to go back to this screen that I skipped. I actually got them out of order. This is what millennials and Gen Z expect of businesses. Now, where I got this is coming from Deloitte. Deloitte did a survey, and in the survey, it described what millennials and Gen Z expect of businesses. There's a long article on it, just came out last year. If you just want to, you can Google some of these words and Deloitte, it'll pull it up. This is what they expect. I want you to think about your church in context of what Gen Z and millennials are expecting from business, because you know what? They're also expecting the same thing from your church. I'm not saying all this is right. We can talk about it a little bit. Number one, they want a company with a clear mission, a clear vision, a clear understanding of what they're doing. This is from what they want from businesses. A collaborative and innovative culture. A management team that is committed to employee success. I want you to think about when we're going to talk in small groups about what some of this, what this carries over into your church. And some of y'all have some millennials and Gen Z you're thinking about right now. Those mouthy ones, those opinionated ones, the ones that have a lot of ideas that you're like, whew, that's a lot for me to take in. Our people, they're talking about this stuff, I'm going to guess. They want a flexible schedule, remote work opportunities. We've all kind of gotten used to that, right? They want a healthy work-life balance. ESG, anybody know what that is? Have you heard this phrase? Got to get used to this. This is in our world, and we need to be conversant with it. I'll talk about it in just a moment when I finish the last couple. Come back to ESG. They want transparency, and what's significant for the youngest generation is relationship equals currency. The days of learning some big, elaborate evangelism plan and going on knocking on the door of somebody that we've never met before and ask them the key question and go through Bible verses and memorize plan, whether that's EE, faith, grow, whatever it is we've done. I'm not against those things. I've done them all. Those days are over. I'm not saying we can't use that information. There are going to be opportunities we can talk to somebody that we don't know and lead them to Christ. That does happen. But that's going to be the anomalies. Those are going to be the standoffs. Most people are going to lead to Christ from here moving on to people we have a relationship with. And our people have relationships with them. Our evangelism plans need to be designed with that in mind. That we can't just cold turkey the neighborhood anymore. Now, we can do some things cold turkey to get them connected, to draw them in, and there will be some wins, and there will be ripe moments that we can lead people to Christ. But we need to build relationships. I want to say something again about the ESG. This is something I think as a church leader you need to be aware of. I would say spend 20 minutes on the internet just pulling up, or on YouTube, pulling up ESG and finding out what it means. It is extraordinarily significant to the millennials and Gen Z, and it has the potential of going in a very weird way away from Christianity. But it doesn't mean that it is. We as the church can redeem some of these principles. And if we're, the worst thing we can do, because this is what I've talked to young adults about this area, and I said, what do you think about church leadership and ESG? And this is the response. They don't know what it is, they ignore it, or they don't care. Well, that's me, to be honest with you, until I became aware of it. I didn't know what it was. So what it is they're interested in ESG conscious companies. You'll hear the word sustainable a lot. I think that's a vague term and nobody knows what that means or how to measure it. But they're talking about in terms of environmental impact. They're talking in terms about what equipment that is used. Wouldn't it be easier to just, or cheaper or better for the environment if we use stuff grown at home instead of importing stuff from South America and all the gas and oil it takes to get here? Whether we're for some of this or not, this is the consciousness of this youngest generation. There's a social order, some of that social justice. There are some other aspects there as well. It might include the discussion about what's fair or not in pay. All that comes up. And we can have different political opinion about that. Just know your young people are talking this. And if we ignore it, or we don't enter the dialogue, they think we don't matter as church leaders. And then governance means this. Governance is who's running the company? What are their values? Do their values align with what they're actually doing? Do they have aspirational goals, or is it in reality, are they accomplishing their goals? And here's the big one. Why is it that the workers doing all the job is making 20 times less than what the CEO of the company is making? Now, they expect the top guy to make more money, but they want that gap to be closed. Now, I'll take a time for questions. Do you see anything in that list? There's a lot that we can disagree with, the whole list. A lot that we can have some issues with, and we can see how that can be taken some weird way. But I think there's some Christian redeeming principles that we can enter into dialogue here. Does anybody see anything? I'll take just a couple of seconds here for a question or a comment of how maybe as a church we can get on the same page. Anybody?
Well, I'll get, the biggest is transparency. The generation that we deal with now, they want to know more instead of you just telling them what you want to share with them. They want you to be totally transparent so they're aware what you're doing, how you're doing, how you're going about it. And they'll jump on board, they'll commit.
Right.
If you're not truly transparent, they're going to question everything that you do and how you go about it.
Or they'll just walk away.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the deacons make that decision behind closed doors, and we won't tell you. They won't come back to church.
Yep.
I'm telling you, they won't stay if that's our plan.
The environmental part with creation care.
My grandma said don't throw trash on the ground. Anybody grandma tell you that? There's part of environmental stuff I get real behind. I get behind it big time. There's other parts I might not so much, but yeah. If it means bringing millennials in your church, that your church puts a recycle bin beside the trash, don't fight that. Put a recycle bin beside the trash. That's an easy win to get millennials. Don't get, well, I'm not going to do that. I know churches that won't. That's an easy win. They see that you care. And you're not making that big of a political statement to do it. Some of y'all are already doing that, and you're good. Anything else you can see in that?
The healthy work-life balance.
That's huge.
The day of everybody being there every time the door is open is gone. I mean, I grew up, that's the way we did. I mean, if the church was doing something, we were there.
Yeah, regular attendance for when we were growing up, if you grew up in church, meant you went on Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Tuesday night visitation, Saturday morning cleanup. Anybody had that childhood, right? Regular attendance now, people who say, I go to church regularly, when they ask, how often do you go? They go once a week, once every 2 weeks, once every 3 weeks, once every 4 weeks, once every 5 weeks, and some who say, I go regularly, still attend once every 6 weeks. I think if we analyzed our drop in attendance, it might not be as dramatic as we think it is. It may not be less people coming as much as it is. There is an aspect of it that's that. It might be that everybody just isn't coming as often as they used to. How many of y'all have said this? If we could just get everybody here on one Sunday, we'd have this many people. Well, they used to all come on one Sunday. Now they don't. Why is that? Because of travel softball and soccer and work schedule, and they got to go see grandmama that lives back in La Mesa once a month and, gets sick, whatever it is. Regular men went to church 3 days a week. Now, twice a month. I had a deacon of mine when I was pastoring in Fort Worth came up to me, and he was just enamored with it. We had redone our foyer. It was really nice. It was cutting edge. It looked nice. He goes, this is awesome. I said, what is? He goes, our new foyer. I said, Brian, we did that 3.5 months ago. He goes, oh, I guess his daughter plays select softball. He goes, I hadn't been here he started thinking, I hadn't been here since before Easter. It was like 4 months ago. And he tithed every week or every month. But anyway, this is going to be important as we move forward in discussing aspects of this. I would just encourage you to just jump into this of how the church, if this is important to millennials and Gen Z, and we all of us know, if you're going to be a missionary and you're going to go to another world, another culture, you got to learn that culture, right? All of us know that. Nobody here would try to go speak English if you went to Honduras, and that'd be your main language and your main focus of ministry language, or if you were going to do it in Bangladesh. We all would learn the cultures and what to say and the habits. Well, we've got that here now. It just grew up around us. So let us become missionaries to our own community. So I'm going to go back up here. I skipped, or I had it out of order. Oh, I got to way back up. There's all those flags. I got to give him props every time I show this screen. This is a Gary Patterson drop for me in my life. Most of y'all know Gary Patterson. Not the former TCU football coach, but the Gary Patterson of San Antonio. I don't have to introduce him to most of y'all. He gave me this term, a VUCA world. Anybody here ever heard him talk about a VUCA world? What is a VUCA world? A VUCA world was coined after the U.S. involvement in Afghanistan and Iraq in 2003, 2004. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but our world has changed around us. VUCA stands for it's a world of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And real quick, constant change, it's unpredictable. The reasons for the change are so complex, we're probably never going to know why. If you want to sit and analyze why your church is in the situation it's in, you may never get the answer. You might, but you may never get the answer. And it's ambiguous. We may never know the causes, effects, or underlying reasons to be able to see the whole picture of the world around us. And it may be turning over so rapidly that if we can ever get our mind around everything, it's already changed anyway. One of my favorite authors is Clay Christensen. He died last year of cancer. He was the head of Harvard Business for 29 years. And he made a quote in about 2018. He says, he wrote a book called The Measure of Your Life. It's a simple, small book. It's a great book. And in that, he said, if you're a nonprofit, and he's talking to the church and other nonprofits, feels like it's behind the culture, here's why. Our culture is changing every 36 months. A new, identifiable, measurable culture in America every 36 months. And if you haven't changed, tweaked, and rethought about how you do business and how you operate in the last 7 years, you are 2 generations behind your culture. We know most of our churches haven't changed or tweaked anything in 40 years. We're 5, 6, 7, 8 generations behind our culture. Now, we can't just change overnight and get whiplash, and we'll crash the plane if we try to do that. He died, actually now, 2 years ago, he died in 2021 of cancer, not of COVID, but of cancer. I'm reading now that our culture may be changing quicker than that. It may be changing every 18 to 24 months. You can redefine the. Now, we grew up, cultures were defined by decades. I mean, I could ask you what clothes were like in the 70s, and some of y'all still got it in your closet. You can bring it up here and show us. What music was like in the 80s. By the way, the 80s music was far better than today's music, in my opinion, but the 60s might have been the best. But anyway, 80s were good stuff. We knew by decades. Well, now it's turning over. And so when the people in your church, in our community, and they say, man, it just feels like the world around us has changed. Do you know why it feels like the world has changed? Because it has. And we have to adapt. The world used to be a simple world, and the Industrial Revolution brought on something called the complicated world. And in the last 20 years, primarily, not the only reason, but primarily because of these and geopolitical events, we've moved from a complicated world to a complex world. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because I do want to kind of move on, but I will read this last statement at the bottom. I know you can read. A complicated world requires more expertise, higher efficient programs, but a complex world requires adaptive leadership. If you haven't gotten in tune with that terminology, y'all, Chad, how many times I've said this one book? Some of y'all have read it. Some of you sit in your church leadership. Canoeing the Mountains is the book for this generation. It was written right before COVID. It was the most timely book. They hit the market when it did. I don't know if you can get Todd Bolsinger. He would be a much more interesting guy here than me. So if he can come, I know he'll come. I know he came to First Arlington. I know he came to do some stuff in our building. Some of y'all know who Pastor's Common is. He spoke to Pastor's Common. He's a staff, leadership staff at Fuller Seminary. He wrote the book Canoeing the Mountains. And he talks about what it means to have adaptive leadership. In a complex world, everything is interconnected, and there's never just one or two outcomes. I got to put my glasses on. But almost incalculable possibilities. Most churches and organizations are still operating like it's a complicated world. I think I said the wrong word, a complex world. We've shifted, and our churches haven't. What we're operating in is, this is what we think, and this is what your church member thinks. This is why they're mad at you as their church leaders. Well, Pastor Phil did this in 1993, and if you'll do the same thing, it'll work now. No, it won't. It won't work now. We're in a different world. Now, I'm not saying there aren't elements that he did that were great. Yeah, some of that's going to work, for sure. But he didn't deal with the world that we lived in. Population has changed, religion has changed, jobs have changed, lots have changed. We're in a very complex world. This is food for you to thought, that if you want to just go back, and I want you to just start thinking about this, find some podcasts, read some books, talk to each other. I'm going to give you my cell phone, call me, I'll talk to you all day about it. But for the sake of time, I'm going to move on. I told you I could talk a long time. So what do we do next? These are just open questions. I'm not going to try to answer right now. Some of this we're going to do in small groups. as Daryl and Ed, as Roland and as others lead you, you're going to kind of answer some of these questions as groups or think about it on your own. What adjustments should we make now? Do we need to make any? I'm going to say it again. If your church reaches 200 people in the next 7 years, let's go 210. Let's just make it really easy math. How many people does every church in here need to reach annually to reach 210 in the next 7 years?
Saved or unsaved?
I would prefer saved. Yes. 30. We need 30 salvations and baptisms annually from every single church for the next 7 years. I don't know the church's averages. That seems like that would not be normal. So we have to do something now to adjust. And it might just be that we rely on the Holy Spirit. And I can preach a sermon on the Valley of the Dry Bones, but we'll move on. How should our cooperation change? We have to cooperate. We have to cooperate with all like-minded folks as much as we can. I have a twin brother. I mentioned that he's in Seattle. Before that, he was in Algeria. We like to joke when we went in our early ministry, we both were foreign missionaries. He went to Algeria and I went to Alabama. And so I'm not sure who had the biggest culture shock going to Alabama or Algeria. And this is what I like to say about that, about the difference in Algeria and Alabama. Where my brother was, he could be murdered on the street if he preached the gospel. I wasn't worried about anybody murdering me in Alabama for the gospel. They might murder me if I like the Crimson Tide or the Auburn Tigers. I'm not sure how that would go. So we went neutral. We were UAB fans. Y'all know who UAB is, right? My wife and I got there. He had to learn not one but 2 languages. He learned French and Arabic while he was there. Even though they speak a slightly different English, they could understand my English in Alabama. I didn't really have to learn much. I mean, there's a few words, and one thing drove my wife and I crazy in North Alabama, they don't put the S on the end of plural words. How far is the road up there? It's about 6 miles. It drove my wife crazy and me, and she goes, how old's your son? My son's 13 years. And we just, every conversation with everybody, we just want to go at the end of everything that they said. 13 years. That's pretty subtle. My brother had to learn Arabic, okay? It's a little easier for me to get past that little hurdle where I live. The food, pretty similar. They don't have chicken fried steak in Alabama. They have country fried steak, and it looks a whole lot the same, though. I say that to say this, as we think about our cooperation level, when my brother was in North Africa, he went arguing over some microscopic Baptist doctrine of who you're going to partner with and pray with. The Church of Christ, the Assemblies of God, the Catholics, and the Baptists all work together. And I'm going to make a crazy statement. I think our churches think our shift has been like me going from Texas to Alabama, when in reality, it's a whole lot more like going from Texas to Algeria. And we haven't made the steps to make that transition. Maybe even to some degree linguistic. So we should cooperate with each other. Churches, we're not in competition. We know that. Associations, whatever our infrastructures are, state conventions, national entities, other groups. It's time to be partners with as many people as we can. We need to start more churches. I'm all about that. And I can identify, I think we looked, Daniel, if you know Daniel De Leon, Daniel works with me in the church starting world. We met with Daryl and with Roland a while back, and we identified at least 11 locations in the greater San Antonio area that could use a church yesterday. Or more, probably many more. We need to revitalize our existing churches. I know SBTC has a Genesis, and we have a new revitalization program called PAVE. Jonathan Smith is the head of that. He's going to be here today. There was a real bad traffic accident on I-30, and he never made it to the airport in time, and so he didn't come. But there's resources out there. The renewal through the associational office, you can do that through a number of entities out there. I know we're calling it different names. I've heard regeneration, revitalization, renewal, revival. Whatever it is, we just got to We just got to get on fire and do something to have our churches grow. I don't know if I can plow forward and go, this is my favorite. And where's Chad? I finally made I'm not going to draw it today. You've seen this a couple times. I'm not going to draw it today. This is where I think, if I had to boil it all down for me to one slide of what you can take away in your church and understand what it means, And most of this comes from clearing them out, not all of it. This would be my takeaway for me, and I'm just going to talk to me, and y'all are allowed to listen if you want to listen. You have to become captains and leaders of adaptive leadership. You have to learn that. We have to change. And where this originally came from was General Stanley McChrystal, head of all the U.S. Armed Forces 2003, 2004 in Iraq, said we are the world's best army, biggest army, the biggest budget, the best equipment, the best communications, the best control the world's ever seen. And we're getting our butts handed us by two guys driving around in Nissans with cell phones. What's wrong with this picture? It's in the book Team of Teams. I would highly recommend that. That's a little old. It was written in 2012. Stanley McChrystal, outstanding book. Especially if you're connected to the military, you'd love it. And when he talks about it, he says, here's the problem in our culture. In the military, he says it applies to religious, to schools, to the municipalities. Here's the problem. Does this sound like Baptist life, by the way? He says, everybody in our organization can't get along with each other. The Navy doesn't like the Army, doesn't like the Marines, doesn't like the Air Force. Within this battalion, doesn't like that battalion. Nobody likes the French or the British. We can't work with the Germans. We certainly don't trust anybody else. The CIA and the FBI, and nobody work with each other. And we're all kind of doing the best we can to work with everybody else, but we're all keeping our own information close to our vest, and we're going to just kind of hang on to it, and we just give a little bit out, and we don't quite trust each other, and we've all built ourselves up in silos. We've got to break all that down to work together as teams. Does that describe the Baptist world? Did I just hit it pretty well? By the way, if your spouse or your loved ones in the education world, I just described Texas educational life too. My wife's a teacher, so probably other businesses too. So we have to be great at adaptive leadership. This is the trust triangle. That there's a triangle of trust in every relationship we have. You have a level of trust with every single person you've ever met to some degree. To some level, you trust the lady that's checking you out at the grocery store when you give her your credit card, that she's not going to take you and run out the back of the building, right? That's a minimal trust, of course, right? But there's a level of relationship we build up with everybody in our churches and our family, and there's two basic legs to it. The left side is your knowledge base. This is what you know. If you're going to be an adaptive leader, they want to be able to believe in you, that you're competent, that you know what you're doing. And that starts for ministers. Can you preach? Can you lead a meeting? Can you budget? Can you set up a trip? If you can't do those things, your knowledge base isn't going to go very far. And they can pick apart our preaching pretty quickly. Use about half a sermon, right? By the way, most people judge their churches on the sermons initially. Long term, that's not true. So when you're new to a church, this is the most important leg. Or you're new to a family that joins your church, this is the most important leg, initially. The second leg is relationship, or being relational. And this is where they're going to trust you if they know you're behind them, if you've got a relationship. This is your love, your emotional intelligence. This is your ability to connect with them. And the terms that I've used with our staff is proximity and frequency. The more that you are near your people, and how often you're with them, the better off you're going to be. They know that you love them, right? Now, on the left side, this is the initial gauge of how they know they can trust you to lead them into the future. But over about a year and more, over time, it only amounts to about 15% of how much somebody can trust you. 85% of the relationship, of the trust relationship that people have in our lives is, do you care about them? It's the old adage, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Your relationship with your people is more important than your ability to preach good sermons or have good meetings. You got to do that. You're not going to lead people unless you live life with them and you kind of know what you're doing. I'll tell us one quick story and I'll move through this. I'll leave it nameless. I'll leave it vague. It's west of I-35 in Texas. Texas is big enough. That's a pretty broad area, right? Young pastor, his first church, 42. So just now getting into ministry. It's his first church. He went about 14 months ago to this church. He moved mid-December. He called me on December the 20th. He'd been there a week or two. He said, hey, Tom, I need your opinion on something. I said, I need to change the bylaws and constitution by the end of the year. What do you think? I said, the end of what year? He said, this year. It was December the 20th when he called me. He'd been there a week. I said, oh, please don't do that. How many of y'all think that was a really good idea to change the bylaws week 1? I said, by the way, it's December 20th. I said, all you need to do is sing Christmas carols. That's it. This is an easy win as a pastor. Just show up and sing Christmas songs. That's it. Preach a sweet sermon. They're not even really judging. They're just happy right now. I said, please put that off. You don't need to do that right now. Don't worry about that this year. If you even need to deal with that down the road, deal with that down the road. But don't do it right now. So on January the 3rd, he called me back. Well, I did what you said. I said, what did I say? Because when people say you did what they said, he said, I waited until this year to bring it up that we're going to change the bylaws of the Constitution. I brought it up yesterday. So people weren't real happy with me. I didn't say wait 10 days, my word. He called me in March. Well, I need some help. How do I run off a key leader in my church? I said, please don't do that. Please don't do that. Well, you don't understand the problem. He's the chairman of the deacons. Oh, please don't do that. And he comes once every 3 weeks. That's it. I can have chairman of deacons, only comes once every 3 weeks. Why does he only come once every 3 weeks? That's kind of curious. He says, let's talk work. Why? And this is the story he tells me. He says he owns oil wells and cattle all over Texas and New Mexico. And his route that he goes and checks on takes about 3 weeks. And he has 2 other churches that he also calls his home church, but this is his primary where he tithes and where he lives. I said, please don't run this guy off from your church. Well, he thinks he owns the church. Well, he employs everybody in the county, I bet. Why does he think he owns the church? Well, the church burned down in 2004, and he didn't like it was located downtown, and so he bought 15 acres on the edge of town, and he didn't even file on insurance. He just paid cash when he built a new church. Now, I don't know about y'all. I don't think anybody should own the church, but if there ever was somebody that could claim they own the church, it might be this guy. Right? It's Jesus' church. They weren't following this pastor. He called me. I met him over Christmas break. He's looking for another church. Now, he's still there. It's not going well. They're not listening to him. Is that news to anybody here? Anybody shocked with that it's not going well? Adaptive leadership is when they can trust you based on your knowledge, but also your heart, right? Y'all know this. I'm preaching to the choir. Oh, going the wrong way. I put a dotted line here, sort of a dotted line, and it takes 18 to 60 months to get to that point they can trust you to follow you. 18 to 60 months. Right? Some of y'all nodding. Y'all know what I'm talking about. 18 is the minimum. With one exception. About throw the exception up there. 18 months is the minimum. And it might take 5 years for the church to totally trust you. If you hadn't got the church's trust in 5 years, it might be time to get the resume together, right? The exception to that is if there's a major event or crisis that happens in either the church's life or that family's life. I moved to Fort Worth. First week on the job, first day in the office, on Monday, I get a call. Cora Bell has had a stroke. She's in the hospital. Her husband's Wendell. I go to the hospital. I sit with Wendell for 4 hours. My first day on the job, I didn't do anything I planned. Y'all know your first day. You really don't have a whole lot planned anyway. I went and sat with Wendell. Did I become Wendell's pastor that day? It didn't take me 18 months to be Wendell's pastor. I was Wendell's pastor day 1 because of the crisis in that family, in their life. And he still loves me today. Great old guy. He fought on a destroyer in World War II, shooting down kamikazes, and he's still alive today. He's an interesting guy. One of the few that are left. Once you pass that critical point, and you think about, and I'm talking about also in context of the millennials that are in your church, the people that are moving from Illinois, the people that have come here from other countries, of the people that have now part of your church, once you pass these critical points with them individually, but also with the church at large, that black arrow represents the adaptive leadership that you now can go and lead. But you have to put all this other stuff into context, and then you have to become adaptive leaders. A lot more to be said about all of that. Please read the book, Canoeing the Mountains. I don't get a cut off of it. I didn't have a copy here. I usually give it away. I've probably given about 300 of them away, but I don't really have that many left in my office. But I think it's a great book. I like the Bible more. Don't think I don't like the Bible, but I like the Bible, and that is adaptive leadership. I want to go over this also as you consider. I can talk all day about each of these 3. I have a 4-hour talk on each of these 3 points. Y'all think, really? I've had all I can take now. But there you have church starting, church revitalization, and church health. And by the way, I think from here on out, the rest of your life, in ministry, if you change positions, the rest of your life, you will go to a church that needs to be revitalized. Absolutely I will argue with you if you tell me otherwise. The rare exceptions are so rare, they don't count. Somewhere between 95 and 99% of our churches are plateau, declining, and dying. That means 99% need to be revitalized. And the ones that are the 1%, they don't need a new pastor right now. Okay? So if you're in ministry, you're going in revitalization here on out. You probably have the last 3 times anyway, and you just didn't know it, right? If I'm going to lead the church through revitalization, I'm going to start first with that far right corner. I think the last time I did this, I flipped church and community profile. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. All this you already know. This is not really the whole point of this, but I want to whet your appetite with this. If everything I said so far is true, if the population is shifting, if it's based on work, if this is what the young people are looking for, if it's by racial inclusivity, if it's by working with others, then we've got to know who our communities are. If we don't know who our communities are, we will not be an effective church. Period. End of story. And if we don't look like our immediate community, we will not be an effective church. If everybody in your church is driving 6 miles or more to get to your church, you are not reaching your community. And that's most of our churches. So I'm not going into a lot of details. You know what these steps are. We can do demographics. We can look at histories, trends. We can do some observations. We can help with some needs and interviews. And I can talk a long day about all of that stuff. I'm not going to do that right now. But you have to develop an actual written out plan, some kind of identifiable way. I'd even have a community profile team in the church to explore what does our immediate context look like today. It does not look like it. If you did this before, it doesn't look like it did in 1990, except for in rare cases. I would update it. If you've never done it, it might be a good idea to do it. And then I also would do a church profile. Who's in our church? There's different avenues of doing that. Associations have that. Churches have that. It might be something, different names. It could be that you're looking at the strengths of the church. It could be you're looking at discipleship. I think Life we had transformational discipleship analysis. It was really, really good. TDA, I think is what it was called. That includes looking at your attendance, your history, do a SWOT analysis. You know what that is. Strength, weaknesses. The O could be obstacles, or it could be opportunities, or both. T is threats. You just do an analysis of where your church is. Some of y'all have done that before. Look at your spiritual gifts and strengths. And so here's the point. If you would take a really critical eyeglasses look at your community and your church, I want you to see how close they look like each other. And they probably don't. To use the analogy, our churches and our community probably look more different than the Pharisees and the people of Jesus' day, and Jesus was trying to put them together. They probably had more in common than we do with our immediate context today in a lot of ways. So then, if we're going to be adaptive churches, reaching our community, trying to reach those 200 people or 500 or whatever you got to do, we have to figure out what the strategic bridges are. Pastor, you're part of that, or church leadership, you're part of that. I would suggest every church have a community engagement team. Because your church doesn't exist the community doesn't exist for your church. Gone, absolutely gone is the day that it matters that you have a building in that community anymore. That doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to the Boy Scouts. That's why most of them have sold their buildings. It doesn't matter to the Masons, why most of them have closed their doors. It doesn't matter to the lodges. It doesn't matter to Little League Baseball that they have an organization in a community. Little League Baseball, Little League Basketball, Little League Football, with the exception of when their local team goes to the World Series or the Super Bowl, which doesn't happen often here in Texas, have plummeted in their numbers. And used to, every organization had 10, 12, 13 baseball teams per age level, or basketball teams per age level. And now it's 6 or 4. And some local agencies of baseball and basketball all over the country, all over Texas, are closing their doors, and their leaders are saying, we just can't get anybody involved in basketball. You telling me kids don't want to play basketball? No, they just don't want to come play basketball in your organization. They're figuring out ways to do it.
And the same is true in our churches. Well, people just don't want to go to church.
No, they just don't want to go to your church. If they're going to be honest, that's what they might say. Well, what do we do? And part of that is because institutionalism is dying in all of those areas. I'm way off topic, but another thought that goes with adaptive leadership is, I'm probably not going to look at the last 2 or 3 slides. I'm glad to talk about it with you in private. We have to be able, this is a stupid statement, I know it, we have to be able to anticipate the unanticipated. How do you do that then? How can you anticipate something that you can't anticipate? It's such a silly, well, you can't totally, but you can be ready. With the best understanding of what's happened up to this point, the best implementation of everything going on with us, all the inputs, we can make some sense of where we are and then adapt. By the way, here's why I like the book Community of the Mountain so much. There's a section in there that says to churches, give your pastors a break. Y'all need to highlight that and just give it to everybody in your church. Give your pastors a break. They weren't trained for this. Anybody in seminary trained for all the stuff we deal with in church today? That's not the seminary's fault, by the way. They did a great job. It wasn't their role to teach us to be adaptive in 2023. It was their role to teach us, as Aubrey Malper says, to preach good sermons and lead church administration. It's theological. It's not practical. That's kind of the point. When seminaries were started, it was supposed to be theological. The practical took place in the local church. And somehow we just didn't do that. Malpers goes on to say that seminaries are doing a really good job of teaching people how to preach biblical sermons and doing a bad job of leading organizations. Well, that's not exactly what they were led to do or made to do. So we have to figure this out on our own. How do we do that? Real quick, making the most of every opportunity that we have. Start with what you know. That's pretty easy. You know something. Whatever you know, it might not be much, but you know something. You pay attention to movements. There ought not be hardly anybody in your church that knows your neighborhood better than you do. Many of you are already there, I know that. By the way, when in Community of the Mountains, when it says give your pastor a break, it says this, let him fail sometimes too. I'm going to tell you, when I read that, that was such a relief to me, personally, because I think every new thing and everything I'm a part of and every initiative has to be perfect, or my job, my value, my name and reputation is on the line. And the reality in the world is you're going to do great stuff and it's going to fail. And that's okay, because that's adaptive leadership. Then everything's going to be perfect. It's going to be some mess-ups. Pay attention to the movements. Consider what range of options there are. Talk about it with others. Look for trends, not specific behaviors. What's happening that you think will continue? What's happening that you think will not continue? Where I live, I was a pastor in Halton City area, if you know that area. There was a house way down where the small frame homes were built during World War II. And this guy tore down his house. All white frame homes, about 1,200 square foot homes, and he built a 4,000 square foot brick two-layer home, two-story home in the middle of this neighborhood. Is this an anomaly, or is this the trend of this neighborhood? Are these homes being bought up and knocked down? They're going to build these big homes there all of a sudden. That happens, right? Y'all are seeing it happen in some of your areas, so I had to figure. But this didn't seem like a likely area, so I started asking around. I said, this guy that built the home, are people buying these homes and tearing them down? It wasn't terribly far from downtown Fort Worth, so maybe get over there and say, oh no, that guy just won the lottery and he just won a nice home in his neighborhood. He didn't want to move. So that's what he did. Well, that's an anomaly. That's not a trend. And we have to pay attention to those things. If I thought everybody in the neighborhood was going to tear their house down and build a brick home, I would be wrong. That's just an example. So what's going to continue, what's not? What are the needs in your community? I could talk all day about exegeting your community. It's part of what I was saying earlier. And then everybody here needs to, as your leader, start writing down what are your leverage points. What do I mean by that? Leverage points you have in your church and in your community. What can you change? What can you not change? The point is not how can I change the world, but to what I can apply leverage to move my part of the world. You're not going to get 200 new people overnight. Maybe if your preaching is good enough and you're fantastic, it's possible that somebody might. I can't, but maybe somebody can. But what I can do is get 2 new people to church next week or next month, focus on leading people to Christ. And our church grow about 30 a year, and I can figure out my leverage points. I talked about all this with the pastor in White Settlement, at First Baptist White Settlement, and we had him engaged in his community. The church was doing nothing in their community. We finally, through discussion, he called the superintendent of White Settlement ISD and said, hey, I'd like to be involved in the school system. Is there something I can do? And the superintendent said, we don't want churches involved in our school system. But if any school needs any help, it's the elementary school closest to your church. You can call that principal. I'm making no promises. He called the principal. He said, hey, is there anything our church can do? We'd love to have you come do stuff in our church. Whole different attitude from the principal and from the superintendent. She says, well, what we really need is we don't have a PTA or a PTO. Would you come help us with that? She goes, yeah. She goes, would you be the president? He said, yeah. Would you organize the meetings? Okay, and he did. And they've got now 20 people coming to their church as a result of him just calling the school and saying, what help do y'all need? And he got involved. That's about a 2-year process. That didn't all happen overnight. That's a leverage point. You have them, and we don't know what they are. Talk more about what that means. Find the tipping points, the things that really make a difference. There's a lot of stuff we do that doesn't work and doesn't make a difference. Identify what that is and stop doing that and do something different. Look for your max return on investment. And you, if some of you are imaginative people and creative, use that. I had breakfast with a pastor this morning, and he was talking about what their church is doing, and all kind of they're doing outdoor life type ministries, and they're doing they have a ministry disciple group built around gaming, where they get young men to play video games together and then turn them off and talk about the Bible. I'm gonna tell you, when he told me that, I thought 2 things. That's weird. That's the first thought that crossed my mind. Did you think the same thing, Daniel? You thought the same thing? That's weird. And number 2, I'm a goofy old dummy for not clapping my hands because he's doing something I'm not doing and reaching young men who like video games. Right? I'm probably not going to do that ministry myself. But somebody out there, if they can be reached by Christ within biblical, ethical realm, let's let them do it. Let them be creative. To anticipate the unanticipated is that last statement. Make judgments based on what you know, the movements, the trends, the needs around you, your leverage, and your imagination, and then being willing to pivot on a regular basis. The last slide I'll show, and then if you have any questions, I got one more with my name on it. This is where you need to examine where your church is. This is the growth cycle, life cycle of every church. And it starts at some point. All of y'all got a start date. Most of y'all know what it is. A few churches, we don't even know when they got started, but most of them know. It might have been 1859. And it might have been 2021. I don't know when you started, but you know the day your church started. Some documents have that somewhere. And it grew at some point. If it didn't ever grow, you wouldn't be here, right? It wouldn't exist. Had some strategic growth, had sustained health, and then we slid over. We're now just kind of in maintenance mode, just trying to just keep everything going, keep the doors open, decline in attendance, but we're maintaining. Then we get into the preservation mode, where we're just hanging on for dear life. There's some churches that are in really bad shape, getting down to life support. The goal, I'm going to step away from the mic for just a moment. The goal for this is, that's going to happen to every church. Every single church out there has this life cycle. Every church in the New Testament has this life cycle. How many churches still exist today that we read about in the New Testament? Anybody know? 0. The last 2 to make it were Philadelphia and Ephesus. And they died in the 1300s. Every church has this cycle. Now that's the most gloomy, pessimistic thing I could say. We're all going to die? No, that's not what I'm saying. Here's where I'm stepping away from the mic. We all need to catch ourselves somewhere around here and restart the life cycle again. And so can't. It's going to be hard if we wait till we get down here. But if we can catch it somewhere in here before we get into the inward preservation mode, and I know this is really hard because a lot of times as leaders, you want to do that, and the church body itself is not going with you. I know that. But if we can catch this new vision, catch this new excitement somewhere here, we'll just start a new life cycle. And then we can start it over and over and over again. In reality, even the most healthy churches out there can probably look at a 25 to 40-year period of constant ups and downs. They can see where this life cycle was going down, and a new pastor, a new initiative, a new program, a new group of people, part of the church, did something new. If I was going to, I'm going to name a number up here. If I was going to say the most important thing your church could do to maybe, as we think about all this stuff, is do something new. New. New brings excitement. New, if it's just a new Bible study group. I know everybody's comfortable. They've all got their names in brass plates on their seats in their Sunday school rooms. I know. Start a new Sunday school class. Or they knitted it in a doily and they put it in the chair. I know how it works. I've been in those churches. Right? Start something new. New ministry. We're going to do this in the community. Even if you think, well, we didn't get a lot out of that. Only 4 people came to the church or nobody came to church. But your church energy was dripping with something new. About new life. That's where I would start. I got a whole bunch of easy wins, but I'm not going to get on that right now. I didn't make it I actually went under time. I got a couple other slides. If you want me to go to the other slides, this is my contact information. Like I said, if you want to communicate with me, that's my cell phone. If you'll text me right now, it'll buzz in my pocket. You can all do that if you want to. You don't have to. You might think you never want to hear from me again. But that's my email address. I think I spelled my name correctly. I did. There's no L's. Everybody wants to throw some L's on there. We lost them somewhere along the way. And so, but if you do text me, would you just say, hey, this is Brian. I'm at such and such church, in case I don't know who you are. And so I think I'm going to stop it there. But any questions? I can go back to any slide. I can talk about any of it. I've got about 8 minutes. And I'll take any questions, and we're going to break up in just a moment anyway.
Yeah, I just wanted to show a correlation there. Turn your, for that slide 12, just turn to that.
Give me just a second to get there.
The adaptive.
This one here?
Right. Now, you look at that, and I thought that was interesting. I love the book by Stephen R. Covey. It deals with trust. That's an amazing, for me, that's really important. But you look at some of the elements there, relational, love, emotional intelligence, proximity, and frequency. Then, if you flip over to your slide 11, you see the ESG that you were talking about?
Okay. Did I pass it already?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, ESG. At the very bottom, they have relationships equal currency. Stephen R. Covey, if you read his book, talks about trust. It's a force multiplier. When you spend that time and you develop a trust, that's organizationally wide or whatever, then, oh my God, that it just multiplies
Sure.
the things that you do. And I thought that was interesting because that's the thing for everybody, for myself, that makes a huge difference in those things, especially in terms of discipleship and ministry, especially because if people don't trust you, it ain't gonna work.
I'll give you an example real quick. When I'm a storyteller, so Janice Davis came up to me on a Wednesday night. I've been at my church for 6 years. 6 years I've been their pastor. Her husband, Dave, was on the pastor search committee that brought me there. She let my kids swim in her swimming pool. On her 6-year mark, she comes up to me on a Wednesday night and she goes, hey, Tom, I want you to know, I invited my friend Iris to come to church Sunday. Well, y'all all are glad to know that. I'll look her up. I mean, thank you for telling me. But I guess, dismissed her. I said, okay, well, thanks. I'll look for her. Tom, you didn't hear what I said. There was tone in her voice. I invited my friend to church on Sunday, Iris. I said, I'm smart enough, enough emotional intelligence to realize there's a conversation I need to have. So what do you mean, Janice? She said, I've known Iris for 25 years, and I've never been confident enough in the church, our church. It was okay for me and my family, but I didn't want to invite her to our church. I didn't know what she would get. It was so inconsistent. It wasn't good enough. I didn't know what she would think. And I finally feel good enough to invite her to church, so don't screw it up. That's what she told me on a Wednesday night. Now I'm kind of hurt. I go, Janice, I've been your pastor for 6 years. And you finally believe in me enough in what we're doing? And her answer that she didn't have to say was, yep. That's exactly what it was. She waited 6 years after I'd been there. She'd been at church all of her life. But she had seen the ups and downs. It wasn't just about me. It was about other people and organizational stuff. But this, just trust. Because somebody to invite people to your church on a bad Sunday, they've just put themselves out there for their friends, their coworkers, their family to come. That doesn't mean we aren't going to make mistakes. And you're not unrecoverable. We just need to know that that relationship is very important. So, any comments or questions?
I think on your slide 26, it was a bell curve.
Mm-hmm.
Launch, momentum, growth, strategic growth. That one. I think what happens to us there, if like in church planning, you have the vision, relationships, program, and then management. As your vision grows, you have to start off with your vision, you begin to cultivate relationships, and then programs start to come in, and then you realize that, okay, we need to manage this. And I think when we get to the top of the curve, our vision kind of starts waving off, because now we have people, now we have programs, and we're managing it. And as we go further and further down, okay, well, now our programs are set. We have our Sunday school teacher, they've been teaching it for 10, 15 years, we're good. Our classes are full, they're good, so we don't really need new
Yeah.
people, and it just continues dwindling. So I think, if we catch it right on the top of that curve, and then renew that vision before that vision starts kind of fading away, because if it's been 10, 15 years, you're right, the neighborhood
It's 7
is
years.
completely different.
In 7 years, you have to revision every church. Every church plant needs to consider revisioning at the 7-year mark for a lot of reasons. For the comfortableness of the church, for the community, for the culture around, all that combined. It's about 7 years that churches need to reimagine. We did a shakeup at our church, and not everybody liked it, but I had all of our young adults under 40. We were just glad we had them, but go through a leadership development thing. It took 2 years. And out of it, I asked all of them to do a ministry in the church. There's 3 parts to this. A ministry in the church, leader of some element. We had 39 people go through it. One single guy, and the rest were couples. So 18 couples and a single man. And they had to find a ministry in the church to be a part of. They had to find a ministry outside the church to be a part of. And number 3, they couldn't keep doing what they were doing up to that point. It had to be a different one. And that's the part that got everybody upset, was when we took all of our young leaders and upset the apple cart because they had gotten so comfortable. But we ended up with a new young adult minister out of it. We ended up with a college-age minister out of it. We ended up with new workers. I would have never guessed that they would. I helped them come up with what they want to be a part of. I work with them. It's a long process. But yeah, we've got to... I would say this: if you're getting into a new building, or if you have the cachet reserved to do this, I never had it. Go take all the names off the Sunday school classes and tell everybody we're not going to keep the classes in the same rooms the exact same way as we've always done it, because those ladies and those men have gotten their 12 chairs or 6 chairs in the order that they always sit in, and they're not going to move. It doesn't matter if Jesus and Paul and Peter walked in the room. They know where they're going to find somewhere else to go, because this is our room with our name on it. If I was going to build a church today, I would never let a Sunday school room ever have a room. Every room would be marked 101, 102, 103, 201, and your class can use 101 for now. And you can't hang a doily in it, and you can't put your name on the door, because 6 months from now, you're going to be in room 117. Now, I'm talking big, and I'm not in your church right now either, so that may not be the best idea. But just because we get so complacent with that. The gentleman we talked to this morning, they're going to go to semester 6 to 12-week Bible studies that constantly renew to keep that stagnation from happening, so that you don't have some person that just takes over a class for 43 years and it keeps the same members in it the whole time. Am I talking about anybody's church out there? Y'all know what I'm talking about? Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, it doesn't matter. It's all the same. Right?
Kind of like drinking out of a fire hose, a lot of information. What we want to do is take a break. Sandwiches are over here, a few snacks. There's a container full of water. We also have some coffee and tea in the back if you'd like any of those. Once you get your lunch, what we would like for you to do is to find 3 other people and get in groups of 4. If you need to move your chairs, feel free to do that, but get in a group of 4 and go ahead and start eating your lunch. That will become your discussion group. We would encourage, if you would consider finding somebody that you don't know. Not somebody that you're very familiar with or that you came with, but find somebody that you don't know. And we'll pass out here in a few minutes a list of questions, and then we'll have a discussion time afterwards. Let me pray, then feel free to get your lunch and then find your other 3 people for your group. Lord, thank you for the food we're about to eat. Thank you that Jesus is the bread of life, and we are grateful for all that you've done for us. Bless our lunch today. Bless our time together. Bless our conversation. May we think your thoughts today and share them with each other. May iron sharpen iron today. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. There was a book written, I think it was called the 80% rule. A case study was done about an airplane that went down and nobody could find out where the airplane was. So they got 100 people in the room, gave them all the facts of what happened in the situation, and 80% of the people came up with an idea. They agreed upon what probably happened to the airplane. Investigators went and looked, and sure enough, the 80% were right. So one of the reasons we want to do a large group session for answers is to begin to look for commonalities between the answers of each group so that we can begin to promote those. You may not know this, but there are 6 of us as associations in this area of Texas that for a couple of years now have gotten together every month. We have weekend retreats sometimes together. We'll go someplace, take our wives, spend some time together. We talk about things like this. We are beginning to talk about regional strategies. What would it look like if associations in a larger context begin to work together? So that's some of the things we want to look at today. So looking at number 2, what adjustments should we make to adequately respond to our context? So what are some of the answers that you came up, your best answers that you came up with to number 2? Adjustments we might need to make.
Yes.
Oh. Could you be a little more specific?
We really believe the message needs to stay the same, but the methods needs to change. We need to find a way to begin to converse with that next generation or generations. And we need to ask the why. Constantly ask the why and not be afraid of the why. What the answer is to why.
Why in the sense of?
Why do we do this? Why do we do whatever we do in our church?
Programmatically, or? Why don't we have any disciples, but we have to convince people to join the handbell choir? Or the ceramics industry, but we can't keep out of the disciples. That's very specific.
Okay. Anyone else? Adjustments we need to make? Yes, sir.
I think we need to intentionally develop new relationships and not just hang out with the same folks we've always hung out with. We have a deal in our association, or whatever, that a group came and they couldn't find a space to play games from college students. And so we just let them use our big room on Friday nights, and there's a crowd of them in there playing games, and one of our guys began to minister to them, to share with them, and introduce them to games they'd never heard of. And so it's just making those connections, relationships we don't normally talk to.
Okay. Anyone else?
Intentional prayer, I think one of the conversations we had is that I think a congregation has got to be intentional in praying regularly for the lost in its community, for the issues that surrounding them.
Dr. Lopez, you want to talk about that a second? Congregational prayer? I know I'm putting you on the spot, but...
That's all right. That's one of the things that we have seen with several of our churches here in the city, and also here in our association. From the time that we've been now, I believe, maybe 6 years, we've been praying to the Lord, and for laborers, we've seen guys walk into our office and desire to be, we've got to call them to be church planners. So we've seen a lot of our prayers answered. Churches have grown because of intentional prayer. So we have definitely reaped the benefits of God's people coming together to pray. We've seen it in many of our local churches, as I mentioned. There's one church right now, as I was even sharing with the guys here, Monte Calvario Church, they pray every Friday. Sunday morning, when I went to visit them, their men's Sunday school had 22 people, 22 men in one class. Looked like sardines, man, that people. But it was all because, of course, I asked them, man, how did y'all get all these men here? Well, we pray every Friday, brother. Not a long answer, but very truthful.
I know you know Manuel Rios. Manuel Rios, the former pastor of the church, passed away in December. I've been here 8 years, and when I first got here, I would visit the church. It was always full. There was always people there. And here in the association, we visit different churches every Sunday, so we're in a lot of different contexts. Every time I would go to that church, and this is just an observation, the music was not spectacular. They gave announcements. It was like a church that I grew up in, just the normal activities. But every time I went, I would feel the presence of God when I walked in the sanctuary, and I would sit down and I would think, I don't know what's different here, because, you know, it's nothing fabulous, so to speak, but the place is always full. People respond to the invitation when it's given. Later I found out they pray every Friday night from 7 to 9. Once a month they'll eat a dinner from 9 to 10 in the fellowship hall, and then they go back to the sanctuary and pray from 10 to 12. That church may not be the biggest church, may not have the most money, but they're consistently drawing people. Intentional prayer. One of the things we do here in the office is we consistently ask God to send laborers into His harvest. And it's nothing to get a phone call or somebody walk in the door, say they're called to ministry or want to plant the church. God continually answers that. What other adjustments do you think we might need to make? Yes, sir.
Every church needs to become a church planted church.
That's good.
We could have started beside that.
Amen.
That's good.
Good statement. I will put a star next to it. One more. Yes, sir.
Most of our bullet points seemed to be moving in the direction of making the church aware of the different generations within the church. So creating more opportunities for multi-generational gatherings, especially just Sunday afternoon lunch.
Let me take a picture of that and we'll move to question 3. Regional strategies, I think, is a very good topic. What regional strategies should we consider? How would you answer that? Yes, sir.
Dr. Horton, one of the things that I mentioned here in our group, and I see it as a definite strategy that could be used in the area of the corridors, and it would be something that would be immediate, wouldn't cost a lot of money, is to engage with those churches, or if we know of individuals that have a small house church, because we can learn from them in how to engage in the areas of apartment complexes, the lofts downtown, the corridors, of course, with all the apartment complexes and the areas, is your house churches. These guys multiply quickly, but a local church to team up with them so that together they might be able to penetrate that area with the gospel. Now, that's what I see that could be something that we could explore. We've had house churches here in San Antonio. We continue to do that to identify with some. However, I think that if we would give attention to some of those, that would be a strategy that's not going to cost tons of money. Your traditional church, you're ready to pay some bucks for land. And most churches that would say, I want to start a church, what they don't have in mind is, hey, they may have to be a co-signer for some property. And then that's where crawfishing comes in. And says, wait a minute, I'd like to start a church, however. So, I mean, we don't have all the monies in the world, but I think that we can plug into some of these house churches or small groups.
How many of you have served with the IMB or served as a missionary in other countries? I know there's a number of us. House church was the IMB model. You read the book of Acts, it was predominantly house church. I'm sorry?
The house church or the cell church?
Yes, house church, cell church, small groups, organic, meaning it starts anywhere, at any place. One of the strategies that you know this, one of the strategies here in the United States has been for a long time is to raise $250,000 to plant the church with full-time salaries and building and property and all that. That's very unreproducible. We don't have enough money to plant all the churches we need. Just in San Antonio, we could plant easily over 200 churches a year just with the growth that we have. We don't have enough money to put $250,000 into every church plant. So something like this would be very helpful. Associations, geographically, working together. Also could be churches with churches. Maybe 3 or 4 churches together from different regions saying, okay, we're going to work together to plant another church that's not in either one of our areas, but we want to plant along one of the corridors. We want to start now trying to plant churches as the new roads go in. Could be many churches working together to plant churches in new areas. Tom's Association, raise your hand, Tom. Tom's Association is planting churches in the north, and those churches become part of his association. So associations planting churches in different areas. Any other regional strategy ideas?
I think the intentional prayer, even beyond just a church praying, but churches, I mean, you guys are doing it here at 9 o'clock every Tuesday? Just
to follow that idea, February 19th, we have 8 churches that are going to join together to pray together. They'll do a youth event at the same time. February 19th is a Sunday afternoon, 5 p.m. to 6:30. Rick Hudson in the back is going to be the host church. His church is hosting 7 other churches getting together. The adults will be in the sanctuary from 5 to 6:30, praying together. Specifically, it's just a prayer meeting. And the youth will be in the gymnasium having a big youth event focused on spiritual renewal. So some of that going on. Anything else? Yes, sir.
It's a little bit more difficult to do, but cross-denominational, like Tom was saying, you know, as I've seen in other countries, denominations aren't even mentioned most of the time. as long as Jesus is at the forefront. And I've, by God's grace, I've been able to work with First Presbyterian across the street from First Baptist, and also a house church. All three of us did an outreach and a block party. It's possible, but we need to actually try to do it more. It's for the kingdom stuff.
Carol, one thing I would say is we are absolutely empty on bank register of leaders right now everywhere. And I don't know if this is a regional strategy or church strategy. Every one of us, myself included, we need to identify the next leaders and we need to train them on one-on-one. All of us, all of them. And that might be the easiest and the hardest thing at the same time. If pastors, it may not cost the church any money, if they could spend 2 years in helping someone grow to become the church planter, it doesn't cost the church any money necessarily. If he's on staff, if they're going to support him, there's maybe some reasons why it would. But maybe we just identify. That's the way pastors did it for a long time. It was.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Horn, just a quick thought. So a lot of this is within the church context, but what about the marketplace? We talked about that shift of more than 60, I think 60% or close to 60% are going to be new employees coming in at the corporate level. So I wonder if we shouldn't be trying to break that barrier within corporations like marketplace chaplaincy, and if that wouldn't help us to develop networks or have an idea of where we could connect and train those leaders within that marketplace.
That's good.
You know, we had a church, it wasn't our association, it's Temple Bible Church, and their strategy for reaching people was they were in the medical community and they would have doctors as members and they'd go out and recruit the new interns coming in. And that was the largest church in our area for years. But it was a phenomenal intentional ministry of reaching out to us. And then they came in and they went off to other places to serve after the training. They started churches in other areas. So reaching into the marketplace with those kinds of intentionality of training up people.
Good. Let me erase this, and I want to just ask the question, any final thoughts that we need to consider? What we would like to do is not just have this conversation be a one and done. We'd like to continue the conversation, so we want to make sure we have your email address before we move forward. We want to get back together again and begin to talk about not just ideas, but how can we begin to put some action behind the ideas. So, final thoughts. Any final thoughts? Yes, sir.
I was gonna say, in that last item that you had up there, my take on it is kind of what we were talking about is, we need to be intentional, we need to be in collaboration and have that mindset that, you know, we're building kingdom focus, not just, you know, my little side of the town, my little box, no, we're talking about being very adaptive. We're talking about that last strategy we mentioned, the move toward complex, and use all that so that our focus, our total focus in all that we're doing is kingdom outreach. If my brother here needs some help on his side of the kingdom, then he can call Mitch. Hey Mitch, we got this going on, what can we do? Vice versa. That's a kingdom approach in building that. Well, how can we, all right, so somebody called me, Mitch, about a church plan over, okay, well, let me get over Solomon, let's run to them, let's see, let's pray about that, see what God has to say about it and all that. And then, but the thing is, that's our whole focus, is up building the kingdom of God here. So that souls are saved, so I mentioned that. And then we're able to make disciples, we teach, and meeting that whole person concept. Jesus met not just partial, he met the whole person. You know, not only just healing, but he met the whole person. And that's our focus that we make in our witness, our testimony, you know, and our task. Be it, and you know, from there, Samaria, the other parts of it, that kind of, those commandments that we were given in that, you know, the early church. Not just, Lord, when are you going to establish the kingdom? So, no, hey, I'm just paraphrasing. It's not for you to know those things that are in the hands of the Father. I need you to do what? I need you to go out there in the kingdom and do what I asked and commanded you to do. Be about that. You see, not about that, not your little box. Your ministry's out there. And be about that. So that's my thought.
Okay, thank you. Any other final thoughts? Yes, sir.
I just, trying to process all of this, I just feel like we're thinking too small. I'm thinking too small. Like a child thinks of something and the parents have got a bigger understanding of what you're actually asking for. We want church revival, it's literally moving here. We want growth, it's literally moving here. We want change, it's literally moving here. So thinking bigger than what we think. You know, we were mentioning getting 200 people in 7 years or whatever, getting that 2% change or that 8% change. I'm not talking about praying beyond your means. I'm talking about trusting in God and His guidance and what He's providing. And you can't do that on a small-minded, I don't mean small-minded, I mean just thinking small. You can't do that. You can't think within just my walls. You can't think within just this programmatic response. You can't think with just in this one relationship. It is so much bigger than ourselves, and it puts comfort and at ease that God is already doing something, and we need to trust in that plan and get on board.
Yeah.
I grew up in the church, Baptist church. We were always taught, read your Bible, pray every day, those types of things. But I never grew up in a church that had the concept of the importance of congregational prayer, of the congregation setting everything aside and all we're going to do is we're going to pray together. I didn't grow up in that context. I had to learn it in my early 20s by being in a church that doubled every year in size because of the prayer ministry. We likened it to a power plant in a city that supplies all the electricity to the city. The prayer is the power plant that supplies the spiritual power to the church. If you worked in the association very long, or it wouldn't take you very long to know we have lots of churches, and we can name them, that have forgotten why they exist. The power plant went off, and we wonder why there's no power in the church. There's nothing happening. Nobody's getting saved. There's no baptisms. The attendance is going down. And we would say it's because we turned off the power plant. So intentionally, like on February 19th, intentionally getting churches together to pray together once again. I think you had a comment also.
Yes, I wanted to share. We must ask the Lord to give us the burden. Because just in hearing the numbers of the growth in Texas and the 20 million that are basically going to be unchurched with no knowledge of that Brother Howell was sharing, that really burdened my heart. And it's got to take us to tears. It's got to take us, and the only way that we're going to see the what's out there is to probably drive these corridors and see where the growth is coming, and then ask and do a prayer drive and just, Lord, what do you want me to do?
Good. We are right at 1 o'clock. I'm going to ask Dr. Lopez, if you would. Could you pray for us? that God would move among us, send us new laborers, give us a burden, do all the things that we've talked about. And I have a few comments afterward, but Dr. Lopez, could you pray for us?
Our Lord and our Heavenly Father, we thank you, Lord, for what we have heard, and Lord, it just burdens us to know that there's a lot of work to be done, and the work is humongous. But we also realize, Lord, that we serve a great God, a God filled with mercy, love, and grace. Father, help us as your servants, as we take these thoughts and to the congregations that we pastor, and Lord, give us the words and the clarity that they might also begin to see what we're seeing and what you have seen and what you have committed into our hands. Father, we pray for laborers. The laborers are in each and every one of our churches, Lord. Father, help us to identify these individuals and encourage them and send them out and equip them. Father, our hearts are burdened for our cities, for our world. And Father, we do not know everything that you're doing in our country, in our world, but we do know that the person of Holy Spirit can lead us to join you in what you're doing in the different areas of our communities and our cities. So Lord, take our thoughts, take what we've heard today, and Father, help us to mobilize your people. We pray in the name of your Son, our Savior, Christ Jesus. Amen.
Amen.